Lesson 11. Liberty and Justice for All? Keep these two words in mind, liberty and justice, as you listen to the read aloud. Think about all three groups, enslaved Africans, Native Americans, and women, and decide whether these people were given liberty, justice, freedom, and fairness when the United States was a new country. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Where have you heard those words before? Listen again and see if you remember who wrote these words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Who wrote these important words? Hint: he was a founding father and wonderful writer. He lived at Monticello, and he became the third president. Thomas Jefferson wrote them as part of our Declaration of Independence. Remember how the founders felt that they were being treated unfairly by the British? They did not feel that they were being treated equally, or the same as, the British on the other side of the ocean, or the British who actually lived in the country of Great Britain. The colonists wanted liberty, or freedom, from the rules of the British. What were the British doing that the Americans felt was so unfair? And so, when Jefferson sat down to write these famous words, he wanted to make sure that the new American nation would treat its people fairly. Again, when the founders met to write our Constitution of the United States, they wrote about liberty and justice. Justice means fairness, so they were writing about freedom and fairness when they wrote about liberty and justice. When we hold our hands over our hearts and pledge allegiance to our country, our final words are, with liberty and justice for all. These are important words written by our founders, but not all people were treated fairly in the American colonies. Can you think of anyone who was not being treated fairly or with justice in the American colonies? Let's look back at the 1700s, during and after the war, when the founders were busy writing these important words. Whom did they mean by when they wrote in the Constitution, "We the people of the United States"? Some people say they must have just been thinking about themselves, a group of white men who made the laws of the land. Were they forgetting the other people on the continent, Native Americans who had lived there the longest, women, or enslaved Africans? These were very smart men, writing words that they knew would be read and reread by others for many years to come. They were writing for the future. Nevertheless, it is true that not everyone in colonial times was treated equally, and even today, people are still seeking liberty and justice for all. During the Revolutionary War, women had different roles than they have today. Although today many women serve in our military and help protect us by fighting in wars, this wasn't the case during the Revolutionary War. Some women wanted to be soldiers, but they were not allowed to join the army. Why do you think they weren't allowed to fight? Do you think that was fair? We know that some women actually disguised themselves by dressing like men so they could fight alongside them. One of the most famous of these women was Deborah Sampson, who fought in the war under the name of Robert Shirtliff. Women also were not allowed to vote, and in fact, all women did not receive the right to vote in America for nearly 150 years after the Constitution was written. Remember, one reason that the war was fought was because the colonists felt it was unfair that they could not vote in the British Parliament, and yet women were not able to vote in their own land. Do you think that was fair? Was that liberty and justice for all? There were many people from Africa who were brought to America and enslaved by the colonists. When the colonists decided to fight for their freedom from Great Britain, they themselves were keeping freedom from a large number of Africans by enslaving them. These Africans did not have the freedom to choose how to live their lives. Slavery was especially common in the South, where huge plantations had large amounts of land to farm, and colonists depended upon the work of enslaved Africans. Look at the image. Can you imagine how difficult it was to harvest or pick crops like the cotton shown in this image before there were machines to do it? In the New England and Middle states, slavery started to disappear after the Revolutionary War, but it continued for a long time in the South, where these large farms were located. Enslaved Africans also were not allowed to vote. Was that liberty and justice for all? For a long time, Native Americans lived on the North American continent alone. Yet, life for them began changing when the first European explorers arrived hundreds of years before the Revolutionary War. You will remember that some of them chose to help the colonists and trade with them when they first arrived. However, it wasn't long before the colonists started exploring lands to the west, pushing Native Americans off their land. Native Americans also were not allowed to vote. Was that liberty and justice for all? So what do you think? Was the decision of our nation's founders to fight a 6-year war for independence a wise decision? It probably was. The government they set up 200 years ago has served as a model for the rest of the world ever since. It was certainly not fair to all people in the early years, and there are still many ways in which it can be improved, but it is up to us, we the people, to make each day a better day for all of us. What are the two big words that you were listening for in the read aloud? Liberty and justice. These two words mean freedom and fairness. The Declaration of Independence of the new nation states that all men are created equal. What groups of people that you heard about were not given certain rights at the time that the Declaration was written? If a woman wanted to fight in a battle, what did she have to do? What were some ways enslaved Africans, Native Americans, and women were not given liberty or justice? The title of today's read aloud is a question: Liberty and Justice for All? Why do you think the author chose this title? In the read aloud you heard, the founders did not feel that they were being treated equally. In the read aloud you heard, the founders did not feel that they were being treated equally, or the same as, the British on the other side of the ocean. Say the word equally with me. Equally. Equally means treating someone exactly the same as, or dividing something into parts that are the same size or amount. I divided the pie equally among all the people at the table. Tell about how you or others treat people equally, or how you may have divided something equally among friends. Try to use the word equally when you tell about it. What's the word we've been talking about? I'm going to name two groups of people. If you think that they are treated equally or the same, say, they're treated equally. If you don't, think that they're treated the same, say, they are not treated equally. Parents and children. Girls and boys. Students and teachers. Brothers and sisters. If you said not treated equally for any of these, try to explain why.